All the areas of unusual, trick, and creative photography into a number of simple categories. I will explain what the idea in each category is and show one or two examples. And some of the pictures I've taken, others I've borrowed, stole from others. So I will tell you how the picture was taken. Okay? Any questions before we turn the lights down? Okay. Let's go. Okay, can you turn the lights down? I created the title slides by using a computer and photographing the computer screen, which is a kind of, creative trick photography on its own. Now for the... While I was preparing the title slide, I thought, I need to spice this a little bit, so I tried to do something unusual with the trick creative words. It might be disturbing for a few, but if you close your right eye, the left side you see the letter is black, the right side is white. When your both eyes are exposed to that, if you have eye dominance, you might see only white or only black or some sort of gray or alternating black and white. Okay, here's a question for you. Look at this picture and tell me, would you say that this is a creative or unusual stereo picture? What do you think?
Average.
No, yeah, it's a nice stereo picture. It has, a number of elements, good depth, good exposure. People shouldn't be standing like that looking at the camera. Generally, it's better if they're occupied with something. There's a street here leading to infinity. My wife and son, by the way, wearing a nice red jacket. Red is always a nice favorite color for photographers. However, I'm standing there, just set my camera straight, looking ahead, nicely aligned, well balanced, and I snapped the shutter. There was very little thought that went through my mind other than trying to figure out the exposure and making sure the camera is aligned and things like that. So this is not the type of photography we'll be discussing today. How about this one? It's a little bit out of the ordinary, especially if you've been in downtown Cleveland. This is a monument of the Civil War right on downtown, and there's a big monument around the buildings. To see this angle of view, you have to look around and a little bit think about it, because it just doesn't pop out like this. It looks like these soldiers are marching right to this modern building. I don't know if that has any meaning or not, but however, it creates, I think, a more interesting perspective of just taking a plain picture of the monument itself. So I'll say, yeah, this is a little bit, some thought went to find the right angle of view. Or, this one, I go for vacation to Greece once every 2 years. I would go swimming. Well, instead of taking a picture of the people swimming, I take a picture of my shadow inside the water. This workshop came out of two tutorials that I wrote for our newsletter for our Stereo Club. When I decided to deal with the subject, what I needed to do, and it's very important for me, I need to make a classification. You might think of 100 or 1,000 pictures, but I thought I would be able to put them all in a small group of categories, and this is what I came up with, and that's what I'm going to cover today. The first group is just an unusual subject, an unusual composition, or unusual mounting presentation of the stereo image. The second group here, you can use unusual lenses or lens attachments to create an interesting image. Or you can try an unusual film or film processing. Up to this point, everything could be done in 2D too. When you come to this issue here, unusual stereo base, this is purely stereo photography. You have to have a stereo picture, and stereo base is just the distance between the lenses, the taking lenses of the picture. They don't have to be 65 millimeters, which is the average space of the eyes. It can be more, and this is called a hyperstereo, or less, a hyperstereo. It can even be negative, which means the left image in the right side, which is called pseudo-stereo. All these possibilities come to you in stereo photography. The next group is where the actual trick part comes in, when you start dealing with multiple stereo exposures. It can be done in 2D, but it's more effective in 3D and more difficult too. Finally, there is an interesting group here, altered sequential 2D exposures. That's the shortest title I can give. When you use a slide bar and you take two pictures separate instead of using a stereo camera, first the left one, then the right. If you change something in the scene while you're going from left to right, you can create some unusual effects. They belong in this group. Finally, you can create a sandwich, which means you take two pictures and you lay them together. This can be done in 2D, and it's a little bit harder in 3D, but it can give some interesting and creative effects. And the last group is something that's becoming more and more popular, and that's a category in which I have absolutely no idea or experience. And you're lucky because Boris Starosta is the expert in this category, so I hope he will explain to you or show you some examples of a digital manipulation. All the other groups can be done with film and cameras. The last one also can be original images in film and camera, but then they're manipulated through the use of a computer, or they even created from scratch in a computer. One point I would like to make regarding unusual subject or composition is not to be afraid to alter your viewpoint. Don't always hold your camera straight looking ahead. You can try to point the camera down or up, or try some vintage points. I didn't slide down the slide with my stereo camera, I just went up there to take a stereo picture. Yep, looking straight up. This was in Baltimore. They have nice ships over there, you're in a tour, just looking around, just think about the possibility of the picture being at the top or at the bottom of something. Everybody who sees that says, what is this? Which is a good sign, means, at least, it's an unusual picture. I don't know if it's good or not, but it shows a lot of depth. This is a display in a galleria. It's a building downtown Cleveland. Now, if you look at this from a distance, it doesn't look anything like that. But the minute you walk underneath, you see there are little plates, and you don't see the plates, you just see lines when you look right straight down. Perhaps to take this, you might have to lay down on the floor. People will think, you're a strange person, but you will end up with an unusual picture like this one. Oh, don't be afraid to experiment with motion blur. Some people say, well, stereo photography, everything needs to be sharp. Well, yeah, okay, for your first, year or two, try everything sharp. Eventually get tired, or you think, maybe I should try something else. I don't know, the leg here, as a result of using a slower shutter speed and fast motion, it just creates very unusual effects. Now, many people don't like this, I have to tell. They don't think that this belongs to stereo photography. Or this one here, in this particular picture, there was an assignment in Detroit. I'm a member of the Detroit Stereo Club, and I love their assignments every month. They give you a topic, and the topic was blur, something like that. And you have to create blur pictures in 3D and make them good enough to win an award. So what you can do is pan the camera, turn the camera to follow a moving object, and then the background is blurred, and if you do it right, and you might have to try a couple of times, your subject will be sharp. Boris Starosta has some excellent results of bikers based on the same idea, but the idea is that you can use blur in stereo photography and create some visual interest in stereo.
Shutter speed there?
Usually they say 1/10 of a second, something like along these lines. Depends on how fast your object is moving. I submitted this picture in one of the folios I belong to, and they said they didn't like it. I really, when I saw that, I said, wow, you cannot see the detail in the face. I've used the flash, I think, but it had been overpowered by the sun, so I can see the detail in the face much better. It would be better if it was brighter there, but My son was playing, he was pulling sticks out of the window, and the light that's more in one side creates kind of a disturbance that you might enjoy or it might disturb you, I don't know. So we covered unusual subjects, unusual compositions. As I said, aim the camera up and down. Turn the camera 90 degrees. You all heard, oh, you have to keep the camera level. But if you tilt it a little bit, it can be very disturbing if you have a horizon in the picture. However, if you tilt it 90 degrees, given the appropriate subject, obviously, you can generate something that, you know, looks very unusual and intriguing. Long exposures, motion blur, and then you have the possibility when you mount to put things to the stereo window, do a lot of creative work during mounting. Unusual lenses, you have a stereo camera, and most of the stereo cameras have 35mm lenses. At some point you might try twin stereo cameras or a single camera in a slide bar or handheld. You can use long lenses, short lenses, or different attachments, star filters, softening filters, anything you can think of that works in 2D, you could make it work in 3D too. I don't have an example of the short lenses, but I know a lot of people with the new RBT cameras, they're tempted to try fisheye lenses, and they create a number of interesting pictures, but I don't think you can go on a steady diet on this, but you know, from something unusual, yes, you can try it. The long lenses, when you look at this picture at Cleveland Zoo, it gives you the impression that I was standing 7 feet from a wild bear. Of course, that's not true. I am more like 70 feet away, but I'm using maybe 135mm lenses here, so I make it look as if I'm pretty close. So that's the effect of the long lenses. But you also have to increase the spacing of the cameras to give more depth to the picture. They're well suited for wildlife photography and also portraits of people. Pictures that work in 2D will also work in 3D with different lenses. The unusual stereo base, I mentioned earlier, the spacing of the eyes is about 2.5 inches. If you increase the spacing, you start creating something known as a hyperstereo. If you decrease it, you have a hypostereo. And if you totally reverse to right and left, you have a pseudostereo. This is called the old executive building. It's next to the White House in Washington, D.C. I was hand-holding my SLR, and I thought I was taking a normal picture. Obviously, I moved a little bit more, and I created a hyperstereo. And the visual impression of this is like a miniature of your actual thing. It looks like a playhouse, not a real house. And that's the effect you get with a hyperstereo. Smaller size, like a model. When it comes to a hypostereo, a lot of people move directly to close-ups of insects and things like that, and they forget a broad category that is between a normal stereo and a real small object. When I saw this picture, I asked people to estimate what the distance is from the wall here to the fence. Most people say something like 8 feet, 6, 8 feet, something like that. Well, it turns out, and they think that the camera was something like in eye level. Well, I put my SLR camera on a slide bar about 3 feet from the ground, and I only shifted like 20, 25 millimeters. Actually, it's so narrow in here, if two people meet, they cannot both fit through. They have to squeeze in the walls, to pass each other. It's very narrow. But by reducing the stereo base, you make the space expand. That's the first, especially when you're in the category like 1 inch or 1.5 instead of 2.5. And of course, you can always go to smaller spacings, and you're talking about macros of small animals or tabletops. It's a big category of creative or unusual stereo photography. This particular image was inspired from another Detroit assignment called Patterns. And I had seen a picture of dice, black and white dice, in some symmetric arrangement. I said to myself, this looks very appealing, I'll do that. After I tried with some black and white dice, I just wasn't thrilled, wasn't happy with what I was getting. I said, well, what if I try some color dice? So I ended up buying a few hundred of those color dice. Then I took some pictures. I wasn't really happy. To create this one, that I said, okay, this is better. Now I raised them up on a piece of glass with a mirror underneath. So you see a number of reflections I try to create this extra depth, layer of depth. And, this is one of the more successful executions of this idea. And it belongs to the hypostereo because I use a small stereo base. This one is a pseudo-stereo. And I first mounted like this, and then I said, oh, mistake. I turned it back and said, wait, I like the first version better. And if you take your polarizing glasses out and you turn them upside down, you see exactly what I was photographing. This is what the scene is, but it's upside down. Now, so I put the right picture on the left side and the left picture on the right side, but I turned the whole thing upside down. It turns out when you try to reverse this, the picture looks better if it's upside down. That has to do with the way the sun comes from the top, or the light comes from the top. If you reverse them, the depth reverses, then you have to turn them upside down so it still looks like the light is coming from the top. It's more believable this way. But you can experiment. Another Detroit assignment was called Shadows, so I just went out during lunch break and I took a picture of my shadow on the steps. Nothing special with that, but then again I reversed. In one of these pictures I reversed the right and left and created this picture. You see the perspective has changed. The steps now become bigger as I move far away. Oh, you turn the glass upside down, it's an ordinary close-up of a shadow on steps. You put it ordinary, you see the pseudo image, and I remember I got a high score in Detroit. I was happy, and the judge could not figure out what this was. He said, well, I had some ideas, but of course they were all wrong. Oops. Why did it go out of power?
So he kicked his light out, probably.
Okay, it's back. Okay. Okay, we're done with the stereo-based experiments. I advise everybody, after you go through the first stereo camera stage, you can try a single camera. And actually I have a workshop tomorrow at 2 o'clock on how to take stereo pairs with a single 2D camera. You will hear a few more ideas there. Now, a big category is unusual film and processing. You can use black and white, but because black and white has been traditionally used for a lot of photography the previous century or so, it's not considered a trick, but it's still, an artistic expression. You can try using negative instead of positive film when you take slides. And there are different processing techniques in which I really have no experience of solarization and names like that. I've seen the results, they all look interesting, but I never really was motivated enough to look into them. What I have here are some examples of the second group. There's a film in the market, I'm holding my hands, called Vericolor. Vericolor, it's the Kodak SO279. Now the normal application of this film is to take a picture of a negative and change it into a slide. So it is a negative film because we reverse the colors, but it also eliminates the orange mask that the negative has in it. Now if you take that film and you try to copy a regular slide film, you're going to reverse the colors and also increase the contrast. And the combination of two might create some very unusual effects. I noticed that when you copy blue color, it turns to orange or gold. So having this in mind, I took an ordinary hyperstereo from an aeroplane window, which has blue haze all over it. It's really not very attractive. I copied in this film, and all of a sudden it became like a sunset. I think this is more appealing. I don't have the original anymore, but definitely I prefer it more than the original.
You took that of the scene or of the slide?
I copied the slide. Some people have put the film actually in the stereo camera. I know what I do is I look for some slides that might have a potential. I copy them using a slide duplicator and this film in my camera, and then I go from there. This one is a monument in Washington, D.C. in the Vietnam Memorial. I took it at night and it was all dark and a little bit greenish. When I turned it around, it became all bright and the soldiers became blue. Well, I don't know. It has some appeal to it. It's better than the original. If you try to project the original, it's too dark to see the details in stereo projection. This is a hyper stereo of a reflection within a building in downtown Pittsburgh. This is the PPG building. I like this picture, and I put in Detroit, did well, but then started getting rejected 2 or 3 times in PSA, so I stopped entering it, but I tried to reverse it, and what I got, to me, was very attractive. I've received a criticism that there is no center point, no point of interest in this picture, but I thought overall, it looked quite unusual and appealing. And I have another example here. Oh, in this one, this is a combination of a number of ideas. Those little noodles are only 1/8 of an inch long, so really this is I use my macro lens for this. My wife was going to make a soup, and all of a sudden I'm taking pictures. I figure out, since we're into 3D, I take those letters out, I try throwing a laser light in them, then I figure out I'll pull them out by putting a number of glass, the glass I use for glass mounting. And as a result of this, why do you think these are lighter than these ones here? The light is the same. I haven't changed the light. But because this one sits behind the glass is absorbing a little bit of light and also gives a little bit of green cast maybe. I had 3 layers maybe of glass to make them come out. So that's why this is light. And that looks pretty good the way it is. However, when I reverse it, here's what happened. The grays become yellow and the green become purple, and all of a sudden I have like 3D in gold. I mean, not only it comes out in 3 dimensions, it just, our stereoscopic interest just shines out like that. And here's the last example. When I was in the Milwaukee NSA convention, instead of eating lunch, I was taking pictures outside, and that's the Milwaukee City Hall with 2 cameras on a bar, so it's a little bit of a hyper stereo, and looks pretty nice for architectural photography. However, when I reversed it and somehow I changed the orientation right to left, maybe I thought this looked better, it just got its own unique appeal. And this thing must have, in one PSA exhibition, has won the best creative. So maybe other people thought that this was kind of creative. This is a big chapter in trick photography. It's called multiple exposures. Now, if you use a stereorealist, sooner or later you'll make a mistake and you will take an accidental double exposure. Now, when you look at it, you're thinking, this looks interesting. Maybe you can design one that means on purpose, because when you double expose 2 images, the result is an overexposed picture. If you're planning to make a double exposure, you have to cut the exposure into half into each picture, and then you have to arrange things so that somehow match. There are 3 groups in this category: simple multiple exposures with split fields, which means you cover part of the picture in one exposure and then you expose it in the second exposure. We'll see some examples. And then the last is the most complicated, where you do multiple exposures with split fields and you do the size and space control, which means you use different stereo bases and different focal lengths or distances of the subject from the camera to create very unusual combinations. I haven't taken a lot of design double exposures. This was one. There is this World War II monument close to my work, and I photographed 2 different parts of it with having the idea to create something like that in mind, where, it gets kind of interesting and confusing at the same time. Again, inspired by a Detroit assignment called Neon Lights, I photographed the sign of a restaurant. Now, how did I create this? I took the first picture, ordinary, and then I moved back 6 steps and I turned the camera 90 degrees. I exposed this without advancing, then I moved back a few feet, I turned the camera 108 degrees now, I took another one, then 270, then 360, and I think I stopped there. I don't know how many exposures I made. By moving backwards, I have those signs separate in depth. I remember when I took this, the temperature was like minus 20 degrees F, and I was staying in my car for 5 minutes, the heat at full power, then I would go out, snap a few pictures, run back in the car to warm up. That's because I procrastinated till the last week to shoot for the assignment. And at the same time, I took this one that won the slide of the year, highest score of that night anyway. There was this pizza place and they had this big sign, so I figured out if as I expose, I move backwards, I'll create a tunnel of this neon sign, and I get this neon tunnel by just multiple exposures. Now, this is an example of a split field. This picture was taken by Paul Milligan, and he has used a device called the power streak adapter. I'll show it to you in a second. What this device allowed him to do is to split the field here. First he exposed the upper half with the bottom half totally covered. Here's his wife saying hi. Then he says to his wife, okay, now you can go. So she leaves. Then he exposed the bottom part. Of course there's no wife here, and you get this person that's missing half of the body, and you get the idea how you can, do some kind of creative and unusual trick photography this way. Now, as it turns out, this is not easy to find. I recently sold one in eBay for a lot of money. It's just a simple device in the 1950s that will fit in front of the stereo realist or the Kodak stereo. There were two versions of these. I've never seen the Kodak stereo. And they go in front of the realist, and then these plates, they go in here and just expose different things, and there's some covers you can put so you can expose this third and then the other two, or different combinations like that. Since I started using my RBT camera, I tried to do that with my RBT S1. This is a rangefinder camera. It's hard to do it in a rangefinder camera because you don't see exactly what you're photographing. You have to cover half of the lenses, but you still see the whole scene. So this is my daughter, and I tried to split right at the top, right around along this tree, and I did a pretty good job because you cannot see exactly where I split the field. She had the great idea to go around and change her clothes, at least her jacket. So, this kind of twin pictures are possible by just doing this split field double exposures. And you can do it with any camera. You don't need the power adapter. You can use, trying to cover the lens somehow and do it symmetrically. There was a very creative stereo photographer in the 1970s. His name is Ted Lambert, and I was lucky enough to get some part of his slide collection. I saw some very unusual images, and I couldn't find the last minute, so there were some better ones. What I was trying to illustrate here, if you, while you are doing the multiple exposures, you move your objects and you change the stereo base, you can have a picture where a painter is painting a paint of a live model, or you have a lady inside a bottle and they're both in 3D. You've seen pictures like in 2D, they're much easier to do. You have to do some calculations. When you increase the stereo base, you bring your subject closer, then you have the subject away, so that's how you control the size of the object. So the size of the object you control from the distance when you take the picture, and then the stereo base will control how far from the camera the object will appear, and then you overlay different scenes like that, and you create very unusual effects. I'm moving now to these outer sequential 2D exposures. I mentioned that in this case, you record your stereo pair by taking two pictures, first the right one and then the left, and you do something in between. What can you do in between? You can replace one of the objects in the picture, you can move one of the objects, and perhaps you can leave everything as is and don't even move the camera, but move the light so you can have the shadows move. I'll show you an example of these three groups. This gentleman is Walter Wolf, and he used to be in the Detroit Stereo Club. He's moved to Florida now. He sent me this portrait of his. He said that his wife used a digital camera to take his picture while he just rotated his head. It was an interesting concept. The camera wasn't shifted. He just tilted his head a little bit, so he created a stereo pair. Then he put it in the computer, and he took a picture of it. You see, the actual replacement method comes when it was time to photograph the screen. He put the camera on the left side, he takes the first picture with his left picture on the screen, then you can shift the camera to the right if you want to have the screen appear in 3D, then you switch to the right picture, and when you see the combined result without advancing in between, that's what you get. This picture comes from Dennis Green of Detroit Stereo Club, who's sitting in the audience right now. It's called 3D geometry, and can anyone make a guess how he created those three-dimensional figures jumping out of the paper?
Change paper between the left and right eye, between the...
Yes. First of all, he has a stereo pair. In the two pieces of paper, he has the left version of this drawing and the right version. So he starts with the left version, he puts his finger down, and the camera is on a slide bar on the left side. He takes the first picture. Then he does a number of things. First, he replaces the paper with the right side of the stereo pair. Then he shifts the camera from the left to the right, and he takes a second picture, and that creates a stereo pair. Everything looks in live depth here because he moved the camera from left to right, and this figure is depth live scene within a live scene because he has switched the piece of paper. I admire this picture because while he was doing that, he managed to keep his finger pretty steady, which is quite of a feat here. If you look at the viewer critically, you can see that he's moved those fingers a little bit. So the more believable you do, of course, the better it's going to be, but it's a little bit tricky to maintain the same alignment of your fingers while in the process you've moved papers around, you've shifted the camera around. Did anybody help you?
No.
No? You just did this alone?
Nope.
Great. Okay. I took this one inspired from similar, the idea I saw it in a book, and here's what you do. You put the camera and you just take two pictures without moving the camera, but I just moved the flashlight. By moving the flashlight, I move the shadows. This is my object. The object doesn't have any depth. The shadow is here, and the shadow has depth. I thought it worked pretty good, and I put it in Detroit. I don't think it did very well, but then, I thought, well, I can add some color instead of black and white, or maybe another object, but this is the idea. You don't have to move the object, you don't have to move the camera. If you move the shadows, then you can have stereoscopic shadows this way. Okay, is anybody getting hungry? The stereo sandwich, the idea is well known, very simple, but it's hard to execute in 3D because you're dealing with two stereo pairs. You have to record each pair separately, and then when you put them together in mounting, you can adjust one pair with respect to the other to bring one scene in different depth levels with respect to the other. So it's not easy to say or do, but if you have a scene like this, a sunset, looks pretty good. I had an idea of changing this, and I think again that was inspired from a Detroit assignment called Flying Things or something like that. You have to find things that fly. Nothing flies there, but at the same time I remember I was taking those parachuters with twin SLRs doing some sort of exhibition, and then I tried to overlap the pictures. Now that I've seen what came out, I could improve it. I think I pushed this, they're too close to the camera, it's not believable. They look like small objects, like little soldiers. By adjusting the spacing of the chips that contains this image, I could have put them back towards infinity. Then they would appear bigger in your eyes, and it would be more believable that these are real people falling into the scene. When you do a sandwich like this and you haven't planned it ahead of time, the result of putting two pairs together is going to be a dark picture. What I've done in this case, I copied to lighten it up, plus have only one chip to deal with instead of a pair of chips. Here's another example. While I photographed the Statue of Liberty from a boat during a tour of the Statue of Liberty in New York, it's a hyper stereo really, and then the moon later, some years later, with a 500mm lens, and then I try to overlap them, and you can see the picture is a little bit dark, and you have to be careful to align. We have two pairs of images to align right and left and with respect to each other, so it's a little bit tricky. The assignment in Detroit was spiritual. So I went to my church and I was just taking pictures of everything I could think of. One of them had these candles on a slide bar, and you see the edges were diffused because I was using a filter smear with Vaseline. You can do that, but you have to be a little bit careful in 3D. Then I had this image from another scene is just plain 2D, but when I placed it in front of the candles, it looked like it was a transparent window. You can see through. And I like this picture a lot, but it didn't well in Detroit. Or PSA has been rejected a number of times, so I gave up. Okay, so we still have 15 minutes, and I've reached the last category, which is digital photography. I mentioned that other than photographing the computer screen, which I learned how to do and it's pretty inexpensive and effective, I want to point two things. You have two groups of pictures. In one group, you're combining a number of images through Photoshop, and you're creating a unique image instead of doing it manually through sandwiching and things like that with better control. This is Guy Martin. He passed away a few years ago. He was a well-known stereophotographer, and he was also a pilot. So he thought this was a nice portrait of him, and he put his name there too. Or this picture is a total digital creation. Oops, sorry. Made by Boris Starosta. And at this point, I thought I would introduce Boris. I don't know if he's even in the audience. Boris? No, I guess he's tied to something else. That completes my presentation. I showed you 50 slides, and I hope you all got some ideas for some unusual or creative photography of your own. Thank you very much.
Let's turn the lights on.
Let's turn the lights on, and I'll answer any question if you have. We still have 15 minutes to go.
I have a question.
Yes.
Where the parachutes are dropping down onto the water, were those three separate people?
No.
One in one picture, or was the same one, just different ones you put together in that?
There were three. No, they were all in one picture when I photographed them. Yes. You see, when I was taking this picture, I had nothing in my mind. So it's a good idea not to throw a lot of, I mean, it just didn't have a lot of depth. The people looked small. But, you know, at this point, you should start saving some of your rejects. Who knows, maybe later on you can use them for a project like that.
The photograph you did of the neon signs before the pictures, you said when you do a double exposure, you have to cut the exposure down in half. You did 4 exposures. Are you saying you cut it 3/4?
No, in this case, this particular case, this is an exception because the background is all dark. So every picture is a regular exposure, but it's away, they don't overlap. If there are bright areas that start overlapping...
If it's a daylight, then you have to cut
Yes.
the exposure step. So at nighttime,
How do you calculate
The exposure or...
cutting it in half?
Oh,
Let's say it's like
it's
5,
one
6.
f-stop difference. Yeah, if you measure something, it's f8, and you try to do double exposures, you use the next smaller f-stop is f11, and you take 2 pictures. And by the way, another trick related to this picture, you have to center it. You see, I was photographing something that has a symmetry, and when I had to repeat that because the first time the picture started coming off. So
straight back.
yes, you have to move straight back. So what I did, I marked the viewfinder of my stereo realist with a black marker right at the center. So every time I was moving back, I would see the center, and I was making sure it was at the center of the sign. Also, the other thing, if you only move the same, if you move 10 steps, then the first circle from the second, they're going to be far away, and then they're going to be getting closer and closer together. Because, you know, depth drops the distance. So if you want to have them symmetrically placed, you can move maybe 1 step, and then 2 steps, and then 4 steps, 8, 16. Follow geometric progression, then you have them spaced equally. Oh, okay. We have an audience request.
Put the lights down again.
Yeah, we can turn them down. Did anybody bring any pictures you'd like to project related to this? Did you plan this, or was it? Okay, yes. Yeah, flowers all over the place.
There's a shot there. This is Tucanoff Garden Sunset.
And this fellow I mentioned earlier, Ted Labert, he did a lot of experiments like that, and he always moved in one place. And in his mind, I'm sure he was designing a combination of pictures that would create an unusual effect. He did all kinds of multiple exposures and split fields, size control.
Now that we have had the rice and flowers, the knot is tied. Why, I can visualize such happy hours close by your side. The honeymoon in store is one that you'll adore. I'm gonna take you for a ride. I'll go home and pack my clothes. You go get your these and those, and away we'll go. On off we're gonna shuffle, shuffle off to Buffalo. To Niagara in a sleeper, there's no honeymoon that's cheaper, and the train goes slow. On off we're gonna shuffle, shuffle off to Buffalo. Someday the stork may pay a visit and leave a little souvenir, just a little cute. What is it? Well, we'll discuss that later, dear. For our little silver quarter, we can have the Pullman porter turn the lights down low. On off we're gonna shuffle, shuffle off to Buffalo.